So, welcome to ELT in Chile, a podcast about teaching English in Chile. In this space, Kevin and I talk to teacher trainers, and academics who like to share their experiences and expertise in various aspects of English language teaching in Chile and globally. In this episode, we'll be talking to Dr. Peter Crosthwaite, who will be talking about the use of corpora for language learning, also known as data-driven learning. So, Kevin.
Okay. Well, a very warm welcome from me as well, Peter. Thank you very much for agreeing to take the time to talk with us today. And if you don't mind, I'll briefly introduce you to our audience. So Dr. Peter Crosthwaite is an associate professor in the School of Languages and Cultures at the University of Queensland since 2017, formerly assistant professor at the Centre for Applied English Studies, CAS, University of Hong Kong since 2014. He holds an MA in TESOL from the University of London and an MPhil PhD in Applied Linguistics from the University of Cambridge, UK. His areas of research and supervisory expertise include corpus linguistics and the use of corpora for language learning, known as data-driven learning, as well as computer-assisted language learning and English for general and specific academic purposes. He's published over 50 articles to date in many leading Q1 journals in the field of applied linguistics, more than 10 book chapters, 4 books, 3 MOOCs, and several textbook series. He is the editor-in-chief for the Australian Review of Applied Linguistics from 2024, so this is a recent development. Congratulations on that. And he is also currently serving on the editorial board of the Q1 journal IRAL, Journal of Second Language Writing, Journal of English for Academic Purposes, and System, as well as Applied Corpus Linguistics, a new journal covering the direct applications of corpora to teaching and learning. So welcome again, Peter.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you for accepting our invitation. So we have many questions for you, but how are you doing, Peter?
Yeah, pretty good. As I said, we're just getting ready for the summer vacation down here in Australia, which of course makes no sense at all to anybody in the Northern Hemisphere, but we're kind of Southern Hemisphere buddies at the moment. So yes. I guess you can actually relate. So that's great. But otherwise, yeah, we, like I said, just tying up some loose ends on some old projects and thinking about 2025 and what's coming. Obviously, given the situation with things like generative AI and data-driven learning, 2025 is going to be a big year for the way forward for both respective fields, and thinking about how we might combine the two as well, whether we should, whether we need to, and how we do that, I think are going to be big questions asked over the years. So that's where I'm kind of at the moment.
All right.
Well, this is super fascinating, the plan that you have for next year. But let's dial back a little bit to start this podcast episode and talk about something that I believe, as both an academic and also as a classroom practitioner, has been one of the most necessary and greatest new tools in the field of corpus linguistics and data-driven learning in this year. And I'm talking about CorpusMate, which you successfully launched and published this year with Bitbeiser. What inspired you, if I may start or lead into this with a question, what inspired you to create CorpusMate, and where did you see a need or the need to create this tool?
Yeah, sure. So this goes back to research that was done with secondary school students in Australia just after the COVID period, heading into like early 2022, where we visited some local schools, did some workshops on corpora and data-driven learning and how corpora could be used to help both first and second language users of English acquire discipline-specific vocabulary and certain grammatical structures that are associated with different school subjects. So one of the projects that we had that was published in Computer-Assisted Language Learning 2022 was a study where we used corpora and DDL methods to train secondary school students in the acquisition and use of the passive voice construction in English. This was based on students who were taking physical science classes at school. And for their assessments, they had to watch experiments in the classroom. They would conduct the experiments by themselves. Then they had to write a report on what they did, following academic writing standards and structure for research reports. Now, the teachers after the workshop came to me and said that they would really like some kind of intervention done on the use of the passive voice because the students often misuse the passive voice in different sections of the research report. So, for example, in the methodology section, the passive voice is really prominent because you tend to talk about what was done to what rather than we did this to that. Whereas in other sections, they would use passive voice where they weren't, where active voice would be preferred instead, or they were struggling with for the second language users to get the right form of the verb in the passive voice construction. So we set up a big intervention with like online training modules, and we used the kind of latest pedagogical corpus tools at the time. So we were using a tool by Jason Chang in Taiwan called Lingual. We were also using the Sketch Engine for language learning, as well as the full Sketch Engine program, or at least the free version of that. In Sketch Engine Open, which gives you access to the British Academic Written English corpus. Now, everything went well with the experiment and the intervention. The students reported improved use of the passive voice over time. But the feedback a few months later, we asked them, are you still using the corpus tools at all? And kind of the feedback that we got was not tremendously positive. And we'd only a few of the students continuing to use Corpora. And I think the reasons that they gave were mostly focused around the tools themselves. So even though these were some of the, I think, more student-friendly tools that were available at the time, the students made a number of recommendations as to what they would like to see in a tool in the future if they were able to design their own. So this was a specific question that we asked them to say, if you could develop your own corpus tool, what kind of things would you like to see and how would you like it to be designed? So we took the feedback from those students and then set up together with VIT, BISA, a kind of prototype, which we then trialed with the international kind of research community. We collected feedback from over 300 people at that time. And then that led to version 1 of the Corpus Mate tool that's been out for some time. I think also we are now in a position to release a newer version to the research community, probably shortly after Christmas, I think, with a new logo, updated user interface, and some new functions that will make the corpus queries a little more powerful and a little more flexible in terms of what we can search for and how we do that.
So it was like basically born out of almost participatory research when you think about it, wasn't it?
I think so, and that I think a great deal of my research is born out of that. I think I got into DDL in the first place in Hong Kong, teaching academic writing courses over the summer breaks, and we were using Corpora to develop the materials for those courses anyway. That's something that Ken Highland introduced at that center, and it was very successful. But I just came up with the idea one day to say, well, why don't we just build like a learner corpus of their writing, and we can get them to use corpus tools on that and maybe help them realize some of the errors and issues that they were having. And that led to a paper in 2017 in computer assisted language learning, and it just kind of really took off from there. So I think a lot of my work comes out of situations where I'm in a classroom and there's something that I want to do or there's something that I can't do, and I need to work out some way to solve that problem. And I think that's kind of how I fell into doing research with Corpora and particularly using Corpora in classroom contexts.
Yeah, actually, yeah, Kevin and I, we've been, using it in class, particularly when in one of my classes, like, questions like that. Like sometimes it's not easy to find an answer. So we've been I mean, I've been using Corpus Mate, and sometimes students are like, "Oh, I didn't know this existed." But and in your opinion, Peter, what's something unique about Corpus Mate? Like, because compared to maybe other tools, like maybe BNC Lab or like even like
Yeah.
Ancon, what makes it like this tool like
Yeah.
more user friendly?
That's a great question. So, I mean, myself and if we're mentioning Ancon specifically, myself and Lawrence Anthony, the developer of Ancon, we actually came out with this like position paper almost on um, how the selection of corpus tools for particular research purposes or teaching purposes is often done in error or at least without much critical thought or appraisal. So very often, for example, I might get papers on DDL to review, and we're working with, say, lower secondary or lower level proficiency learners, and then they're using highly complex corpus tools designed for general linguistic research or corpora that are written or produced as proficiencies that would just be way too high for the target users. So I think in terms of the functions of Corpus Mate, it is a tool that is specifically designed for pedagogical purposes. So that means that it does not contain many of the features that you would find in more advanced tools for general linguistic research, like Encom, for example, which contains a lot of information on statistics in terms of collocation. It has the ability to upload and develop corpora. You can work with part of speech tag corpora, all of these kind of wonderful functions. But then from a pedagogical point of view, the main purpose of a tool for pedagogy is really just to get learners in, get them to notice the patterns of language and to get them out again. And you have to do this in a way that is free, first of all. No registrations, no logins, because straight away that shuts off probably 80% of the potential user base, particularly in school contexts when you're working with children, because they can't all go and get IDs and logins. So it just doesn't work. So you have that. The second is to have a kind of user interface that at first glance is as simple and clean as possible. So the current version of Corpus Mate just looks like a Google search bar. You type what you want and you get the answers. And then you can have a little bit of extra complexity by clicking through some of the other functions. But the first thing you see is just that clean user interface. I think the third one that differentiates it from other tools you mentioned, the BNC Lab, for example, is that BNC Lab is very specific to spoken British English. That's the purpose of the tool. So what we tried to do with Corpus Mate was to provide uh, built-in corpora that you could query that represent a kind of very general range of registers. So you've got general and academic register, you have spoken and written data, and then you also have collections over 20 different, well, I think it's now 22 different school subject disciplinary topic areas, which I think based on the feedback so far, is kind of like the function that most people seem to be using it for. So that has corpora over subjects like geography, maths, journalism, and so on. So this was something that the high school students that we work with found really useful in terms of the feedback that they provided. Some other functions by the high school students also made their way into the Corpus Mate platform, like the ability to cite individual concordance lines. Going to Google Scholar, that's something that students recommended. The ability to get automatic kind of translation options. We're working on improving that function in version 2. Again, that was ideas given to us by high school students. And then certain other innovations like the nesting of concordances and the ordering of concordance lines by frequency of the collocates that appear with your search term. That's something that we did kind of in discussion with Lawrence Anthony. This is something that he built into Anconc before we release Corpus Mate, but we realized that that's really an excellent way of displaying concordances, because most corpus tools would display concordances with the context sorted in alphabetical order, which is okay, but at the same time means you have to click through a number of functions to kind of get to the patterns that you might be most interested in. So that's something that we try to work on with Corpus Mate. So I think that the other tools out there are all great at the specific things that they do, and we're not out there to try to make anybody replace the tools that they were currently using. I think we're very keen to emphasize, even in the training for corpus tools, that we don't want, if people are using dictionaries, if people are using translation websites, we don't want them to suddenly stop using those things and to come over to our platform like it's going to solve all of their problems, because the questions that they're answering with those tools, often Corpus might not be able to answer, but then they've got other questions using those tools that cannot be answered, that can be answered with Corpus Mate or other platforms. So as long as I think everybody's getting what they need out of the tool, then we're happy with that.
No, I mean, this is super interesting. And I must agree. I have been using Corpus Mate quite intensively over this year. I used it during a summer school, or like an English for academic purposes program at the University of Nottingham with my EAP students who were about to enter master's level. And that did work really well, especially for the fact that you mentioned that you don't need a lot of meta knowledge about what is corpus linguistics, how does a corpus work. You can just go in, run your query, see the results, and then apply them to your context. Equally, what I have been working on partially with Jose over the last few months down in Chile was inspired by the encyclopedia. How can we actually operationalize critical discourse analysis, corpus-based critical discourse analysis for pre and in-service teachers in a specific, definitely not L1 or L2 context, such as Chile, which is linguistically rather isolated in the way that you won't have the same context as in huge touristy places like Italy, where there's hundreds of US or British citizens on holiday. So, and also like the feedback that we got from the research that we did with pre-service teachers so far was overwhelmingly positive. Having said this, so apart from these ideas that have been running through Jose's and my mind, what I would be interested is in your opinion or your vision on how you can see the integration of corpus mates specifically into lesson plans, teaching methodologies, and is there anything that you can recommend or advise people who are the pre-service or in-service, early career in-service teacher stages of their career?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I've got the ability to share my screen with you here, I literally just loaded up such a resource. And this is just one of a number of resources, actually. But this resource that was produced by us together with partners at the State University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, where I spent much of April this year working with teachers and researchers and students in university and in local schools as well. This resource was something that was designed by teachers, and we've made this available as an open access book that is freely available through the University of Queensland Pressbooks initiative. This book is called Using Language Data to Learn About Language, A Teacher's Guide to Classroom Corpus Use. And the book contains 16 ready-made lesson plans that contain at least one corpus-based activity. It doesn't actually have any lessons at present that use Corpus Mate because the book was produced before Corpus Mate was released. But the ability to use Corpus Mate in almost any of these lessons to swap it in we've already trialed this with a number of these lesson plans, and Corpus Mate slots in quite well. So, for example, if we take lesson 2, this is one of the more basic ones about describing daily activities, which is suitable for quite low proficiency learners. It's one of the first things that English language learners tend to deal with in terms of topic. Each lesson contains a description for the teacher about the target level and about the target language. So this is about acquiring the verbs be, get, have, put, and take in the context of daily activities. And this lesson plan uses the Sketch Engine for Language Learning platform, which is a really great tool for, I think, for absolute beginners into corporate and DDL. I would really recommend the use of this tool for anybody who's watching out there who hasn't used it. If you want to access it, just Google Skell, Skell. It's be the first thing that pops up. And it's an incredibly powerful tool that offers a wide range of different functions for beginners into corporate and DDL. So for each lesson, there is an instructional video on how to use the actual tool itself. The videos are quite short, I think no more than 10 minutes long. Then you have a bit of a handout about the lesson plan itself, which is very basic. But then you get into the development of the plan, which includes everything related to the timing of the lesson, the direction of the communication in the classroom. So whether it's teacher to learner or learner to learner, the different sections of the lesson are organized. And it's not just something that teachers tend to do or might happen sometimes on teacher training modules where the first part of the lesson is, okay, use the corpus without any kind of warm up or background, any kind of introduction for the students. Like within the context of an actual lesson plan, the corpus activity is not the main thing. It's actually the focus on the language. So there's a warm up for the students. There's some kind of context, some kind of bringing out of prior knowledge and using students' own language to be able to point out what they know and what they don't know. Then they get into a bit of corpus research, in this case using Skell to have a look at some of the target verbs and using the word sketch function of Skell to do that. Then using what they found from the corpus data in sentences and in conversations, and then usually some kind of consolidation activity wrap up or so on like that. So this could be done within a 2-hour lesson block, which might be fairly typical, or it can be broken up over a number of different lessons. And one of the good things about this book, mindful of the different contexts in which teachers work, is that for each lesson plan, there are 2 versions of the lesson plan. So one is hands-on, and in DDL terms, hands-on mean that the learners have access to a device that gives them access to the internet, that gives them access to the tool. So they can go ahead and complete the activities using the kind of input boxes here, and the students have access to the corpus tools and can do what they want with them. We also, though, for each lesson have developed a hands-off version, which in DDL terms means that the students do not have access to a device, either because that goes against school policy, or you're in a context like a rural community where maybe in some countries like Brazil, for example, they don't have access to those devices. So in this case, the teacher would have access to this at home. They might then get the concordance lines that we've given them, that we've kind of handpicked to help them still do DDL, but without access to the tool. So each lesson plan in the book has that function. Now, this is just one of these guides. There's actually been a fair number of these released. I think there's one here now about corporate in English language teaching. This is by Larissa Goulart and Ingrid Veloso. So this is from the US. Again, it's a book of classroom activities. 16 of them using the same kind of Pressbooks function. There are other ones by Ellen LaFolle. There's another one by Dana Gablasova at Lancaster. There's a number of these coming out, and having these open access is really cool because then there's no cost for the teachers involved. You can embed these into teacher professional development workshops within a couple of hours. And as soon as I think teachers see how to conduct a DDL activity within the context of a complete lesson plan, and they have this exemplar and they follow the exemplar, they can very quickly kind of get a sense about how to incorporate it in their own teaching with their own students in their own context. So that's something that I think that teachers do very well at the kind of the cold face of the classroom. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, very well. Super fascinating. Would you be happy to share these resources with the audience? And I don't know, the form of a link or something, so the audience can access.
Yes. So I think what I'll do is I'll send the links later, and then underneath the podcast, you can have the links just underneath the link to the podcast itself, and that'll work. No problems.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, very good resources. And also, I mean, that's like the spirit, like when many people, as you were saying, Peter, like sometimes it's like, hey, let's use the corpus. Okay, let's start using it without any context or no help, or let's take a look at the.
Yeah, it's something that I see in a lot of papers that get submitted that do kind of teacher professional development with corpora. Usually these are done by applied linguists, and applied linguists are not necessarily teachers. So very often they might come at the training from the point of view of, okay, I've got this tool, I'm going to show you how it works and what it can do, rather than showing them, okay, you have a problem with your students, you need to develop a lesson to deal with that problem, and how might you use technology to solve that problem in the classroom. So coming at it from a teacher's perspective, I think is really important. And I think that the kind of researchers who do these, who created these activities, probably have experience as teachers maybe before they were researchers. That's not to say that, people who started out as researchers wouldn't also make fantastic resources, but I think it really helps to have had that classroom experience and to have those kind of problems yourself in your professional practice so that you know the best way pedagogically to overcome them.
Absolutely. And let's say, and talking about issues and difficulties, I mean, you mentioned like feedback, that people gave you feedback, and then based on that, you decided to make some changes on Corpus Mate. In your opinion, what are some issues or difficulties that, teachers or even students may experience when they are using Corpus Mate, or like what's something that you have come across or many times?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the first issues was related, in the first version of Corpus Mate, was related to the corpus sizes, in that I think we had in the region of 60 million words, which in corpus terms is not bad. But then I think that we had quite a split between written and spoken registers, with almost all written and very small in spoken. So very often, if people were querying for quite specific things, they might not get many hits back from the corpus data that we had previously. So then what that does is it limits the amount of DDL you can do with those results. If you're only getting 1 or 2 concordance lines back, it's kind of hard to make a generalization about how the language is working based on very small number of hits. So bearing that in mind, for the second version, we're increasing the corpus size quite a lot with a corpus of literary novels, which we've kind of worked on to make sure that we're not causing issues for copyright, for example. And then other people have provided corpora to us. So we've had Daniel Dixon, I think, in the States provide his corpus of video game interaction, which we then built into Corpus Mate as an additional platform. I think one of the other ones was that we were working with James Thomas, who's the creator of Versatext, and he's quite famous for making a lot of really good DDL materials and textbooks in particular. Originally, we had the BNC 2014 for spoken British English, but the incorporation of that corpus was causing problems for the retrieval of results and things like that because the way that the spoken British English was using the data was maybe not true, like representative of how it might be in other domains, which is fine, but then from a pedagogical point of view, that can be a bit of an issue. One of the things we did in the first or doing DDL before Corpus Mate was where you would get results that had swear words or references to sexual or drugs or anything like that. And we were doing teacher training in more conservative contexts like Indonesia. So that was an issue that with different versions of Corpus Mate, we tried to run profanity filters in Python over the corpus data to make sure that we screened out as much of that as possible. We still got some feedback that some of it was present. So then we took a more manual approach, which was quite fun. But it is fun to go through all of these lines with all of these naughty words in there. But yeah, we have to kind of to get rid of that. And then I think some of the other ones is more kind of people saying, okay, but why doesn't Corpus Mate do this advanced function? And then my response has always been was like, yes, we could implement that, but it's already done better in tool XYZ. So go ahead and use tool XYZ. So I think it's very easy for people to suggest additional functions, but the problem with that is as soon as you start to add too many functions, then the tool becomes overly complex, which is then one of the biggest complaints that people have about corpus tools in the first place for language learning and teaching. So you kind of want to balance the simplicity of the platform between offering the kind of sleek in and out user interface that people enjoy with Corpus Mate versus some of the more advanced query functions that you might get in other tools, which are great. But then I often make the case, and this goes back to a paper by, I think it's Atsushi Mizumoto in 2023 about you kind of need different levels of knowledge for different tools. So I mentioned before Scale, for example, I would use that for absolute beginners. I wouldn't even necessarily recommend using my own tool, Corpus Mate, for absolute beginners. But then there'll come a point where you outgrow Corpus Mate and you go into different tools then that can really get to the heart of the things that you're looking for in a really advanced way. So things like corpus query language, regular expressions, user uploaded corpora, and so on. But I always take the view that if you outgrown Corpus Mate, then that's great. That's exactly what we want to happen. So that if you've mastered everything in Corpus Mate and you think that you know it all at that point and you need something else, then go ahead. That means we've done our job.
I think you raised a very interesting point there when you talked about let's call it corpus literacy, because when we have a look at teacher training programs, for example, teacher education programs, not many of them actually have a DDL component or a corpus linguistics course in them. And also when you imagine, like I was a language teacher for like 10 years before I started this wonderful journey into corpus linguistics. And as an English teacher, your focus is not necessarily on corpus linguistics per se, unless you get taught how it works. So that's something I think a lot of teachers actually appreciate about Corpus Mate or about Scale, the simplicity that and the user friendliness that these programs or these tools actually bring with them and offer the end user. And the other side of the coin is the student, be that, I don't know, secondary or tertiary education, adult education. If I attend an English class, I don't want to become a computer expert. I don't want to use corpus linguistics as a proper research tool. I want to know how English works. I want to know how can I order a coffee? How can I book a hotel room? How can I write an academic essay? So I think this is something that is very, very important when we talk about like the simplicity and also appreciate the simplicity of a corpus tool for DDL.
Okay.
Good. That was just a side comment.
No, that's great.
When we look at Corpus, mate, just to get back to this tool, you hit you mentioned it before. There's about is it 15 different corpora that you combine in Corpus, mate, with the different genres and different registers. I don't remember
Yeah,
the exact number.
it's not quite right. I think we have about 8 different corpora in total, but then we did some topic modeling on some of these corpora
Mhm,
to be able to work out which discipline or which school subject they belong to.
mhm,
And then I think we originally had something like 40 different subjects, and then we combined these into the
mhm.
22 that you have now.
Okay. Yeah. Um, True. And I mean, this leaves us with a huge range still from the British academic spoken English over to video games, TED Talks, and all of that. I
Yes.
would be interested in what was the rationale behind this specific collection? What made you
Yeah.
choose the base corpus or a TED Talk
Yeah.
corpus? And where do you
Sure.
see the
So
advantage for
that's
this in the classroom?
it is a really good question. And there's two answers. There's a kind of a right answer and there's the honest answer, I think. So the right answer is that we wanted to, well, if you remember, the tool was kind of designed with the secondary school students that we work with in mind, and we wanted to offer that range of school subjects across the curriculum so that people working in almost any discipline would be able to find corpus data that was relevant to their needs. But then, I still think we've managed that in a way. I mean, some corpora may be a little bit underrepresented. I think the journalism one, for example, could really do with some extra data there. That's something we could look at in the future. But I think then the honest answer as well is that it's really hard to find publicly available corpora that you can use without any kind of copyright issue or that
Yeah.
people are willing to share with you for upload into a public facing repository like CorpusMate. Because many of the best corpora are basically collected for research purposes. There is ethics behind that data collection. There are very good reasons why researchers cannot share that data with us. So we I think we searched for a very, very long time, but managed to make the best of the resources that are not too specialized or not too difficult. So things like the Hansard corpus of like political reports over the last from the 1850s or something would not be suitable for
Yeah.
this kind of modern data collection that we're looking at now. It would be too highly specialized and would give concordance results that were just illegible to most people.
Mm,
Um, so you have to balance that together with getting corporate that are big enough to be able to give you the kind of retrievals that you need. I mean, we had very generous offers from people to give us corporate of XYZ, but then if these corporate are only, say, in the tens of thousands of tokens, then there's no real point in integrating that corpus into the platform because the chances of you retrieving a concordance from that corpora will be very, very small indeed. So a number of kind of technical and ethical and legal constraints on the kinds of corpus data that you can embed into a platform like this. And it took a lot of searching and a lot of trial and error into different corpora. As I mentioned before, we did start with the BNC 2014, but then had to take it out for pedagogical purposes. I'm pretty happy with the final collection that we have at the moment, which I think takes us up to about 70 million words, which is big enough for what needs to be done with the kind of retrievals that most people will be using the platform for.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, and also this is one of the questions that, that Kevin and I, this is something that we're in the middle of the AI, storm, LLMs, and this is something that's, huge, not only for DDL, but just for language teaching. How do you think that AI will affect the future of DDL, like affordances or maybe threats,
Yeah,
especially?
absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of things I'm thinking of at the moment. I mean, one of them obviously is the integration of generative AI, large language models into corpus linguistics generally, and then corpus linguistics for data-driven learning specifically. So obviously, Lawrence Anthony has already preempted this by having the function in the new version of AntConc, his concordance platform, to use the OpenAI API key inside AntConc, which allows you to query your user uploaded corpus using natural language prompt, which makes a call to the OpenAI API and then gives you the answer back in natural language. And this is really the way that I see the future of corpus tool development. It's unfortunately something I don't think we'll see in Corpus Mate, and that's largely down to funding more than inability to do it. I think we have the ability to do it, but the computing power that is needed to run LLMs locally, or even on, say, our university servers, would very quickly rack up quite significant costs
Yeah.
that we're not able to bear, as we're not in competition with, say, multinational AI companies, right? So Lawrence has very wisely given people the option to use their OpenAI API key so that the costs are transferred to the user and not the producer of the tool, right? But certainly the ability to use LLMs to query existing corpora, I think is a really positive kind of thing that we're seeing. I'm writing a paper with a colleague from Hong Kong at the moment, Lisa Chung, on a new tool called Corpus Chat, which has the ability to do just that. So we have like the British Academic Written English corpus, for example, but we can use the LLM to query that corpus and retrieve the results. And we still have some issues regarding kind of reliability of that, or the replicability of the queries in terms of the response that you get, which is
Yeah.
always a problem with large language models. This is one of the advantages of using Corpora for data-driven learning, is that the findings are always consistently replicable. So in a classroom situation, 30 students ask the same question and they get the same response. But in the classroom situation using LLMs and generative AI, 30 students using the same prompt even ask the language model, but they might get 30 different responses. So in a classroom situation, that can be good, but it can also be a problem if that's something where you need some kind of uniform standard answer, and also where you've got some kind of idea about the underlying data that underpins the large language model response. So that's one way that I see Corpora's data and using Corpora and DDL as advantageous over current technology for large language models. I guess another situation, though, and this came up briefly at the Teaching and Language Corpora conference in Manchester, but it's also something I've discussed in a few other of these kind of discussions, is that something that the corpus linguistics community has to wrestle with is that one of the things that they see as a strength of corpora is so-called authenticity, right? In that corpus data is produced by humans and represents authentic human communication. However, the how long we can continue to say that in the building of new corpora is a major, major issue for corpus linguistics because, say, for example, I'm building a corpus of social media data from now.
Yeah.
How much of that social media data is produced by generative AI? So what you might see in the future is where you're building corpora intending to be of human communication and looking at that, but how much of that is produced by humans? Well, maybe current level like 80%, but in a few years' time, it might be as low as 50%. So this is a major issue going forward in that, and even in social media discussion, you might have one generative AI output communicating as a generative AI input, and you've got generative AI talking to each other in an endless loop, and then you're going and saying, "Oh, but that's what they're saying on Twitter at the moment, and that's the kind of language they're using," but actually it's not produced by humans at all, and you have no real way of knowing that. So going forward, the argument that corpora are like the last bastion of authentic
Just
communication I think that's going to be a real tricky issue to overcome. I'm not really sure how you get around that. So for DDL purposes, that's something I think we also have to be aware of in terms of making claims about the data that you're working with. I don't really know how you get around that at this point in time. But suffice to say, you have to be very careful in the corpora that you're constructing for use for language teaching and learning if you're making claims that this represents authentic human communication.
yeah.
Okay, this is interesting, like quite. I'm not sure if this is a positive or a negative outlook in the future, but clearly we are, as a field, as corpus linguists, we are going to face a certain set of challenges,
Yes.
but also a certain number of opportunities, I think, on how we.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I forgot to touch on it there, but I think the main opportunity that large language models bring in terms of integrating them into corpora and data-driven learning is that the hardest thing still, once you've overcome the software problem, which tools like CorpusMate, I think, do,
Mhm.
the other thing you have to overcome is the nature of the corpus queries.
Hmm.
And currently, it's still a bit of guesswork and a bit of training involved into how you generate a corpus query that helps you answer a question that you have about language. So you mentioned some of these questions before when you mentioned like, how do I order a coffee, right?
Mhm.
How can I operationalize that question into a corpus query? That's not easy to do. And it requires some degree of knowledge of language and a meta language to be able to do that. Now, with generative AI, I can bypass that altogether and I can literally ask the question, how can I order coffee?
Yeah.
Give me
Mhm.
some examples.
Yeah.
And it will give you those examples. So that's something that by integrating that kind of technology into Corpora and DDL, whereby you can generate a corpus query using natural language prompts, that I think is where we need to be moving forward into pedagogical tools, at least, not necessarily talking about research focused tools,
Yeah.
but certainly pedagogical tools. I think that's the second barrier that needs to be overcome. And if you can use natural language inputs and get natural language outputs back, instead of maybe having to read endless concordances or trying to puzzle solve through some of the different kinds of outputs that you get, then I think that's going to be a major step forward for the field.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that because at the end of this conversation, we're nearing the end of this conversation. I just want to pick up on a title of a journal article that I think it was early this year that you published with Alex Bolton.
Right.
DDL is dead. Long live DDL.
Yes.
With the fast-paced developments in the field of DDL, corpus linguistics, tools, AI, you as an international expert in these fields, primarily corpus linguistics and DDL, what would you say if you would if I could get you to hazard a guess, hazard a look into the future, what would you say are the most promising trends in the future of DDL, TESOL, and corpus linguistics as a field?
Yeah, sure. The interesting thing about the Alex Bolton chapter is that we wrote it before generative AI came out.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's still not officially out in terms of it being an edited chapter in a book that should have come out years ago and still is in press for whatever reason. Um, so obviously the things that we say in that chapter are all true at the time of writing. But then we have the additional specter almost of generative AI casting its shadow over all the claims that we made in that chapter. But I still think the claims that we made in the chapter are true. So being able to do things like measure the actual effectiveness of DDL at the cognitive level, for example, is something that we'd like to see more of in research to say, okay, what is it that people are doing during data-driven learning that is helping them that maybe they wouldn't be getting in maybe like through traditional reading or through looking at textbook examples or something like that. Um, Assessment of learning gains through DDL is something I think we had a book, a special issue of TESOL Quarterly out this year on how that works. I think that's another promising kind of area of development. Um, Something that Alex mentions quite a lot is, does doing DDL lead you to be a better learner in general?
Mm-hmm.
So not just focusing on language specific domain knowledge, but does the act of generating corpus queries and looking at language data and making um, generalizations about or inferences about the patterns of language, does that help you in other domains that are not linguistic focused? That's something I think that would be really interesting for teachers and researchers to get involved in. Um, and then I think, yeah, I'd like to see more developments on that. But then I think the other thing I've already mentioned so far in the podcast is the integration of large language model technology into corpus tools. And in particular, if we can get natural language prompts and natural language outputs featured in corpus tools, I'd be really happy with that as a development because I still think that's a major issue for most users is working out how to generate an appropriate corpus query to solve a language related problem. It's not impossible, but for most people, the simplest option is the best. And if I can just literally type a question and get an answer, then that's what I would do 99% of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the key points. I mean, the idea we're going to stay with the example of coffee, like ways to order coffee. Like something that you can actually generate. Quickly instead of just going to a concordance line. I think I agree with that. That's going to be a big challenge. So I think we have, and maybe in the future, Peter, we can invite you again to see like the new version of Corpus Main, or to see what's going to happen next year in terms of development of LLMs or AI.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who knows where we're going to be in December 2025, right? What I like to see the technology. I mean, the main limitation at the moment is computing cost and the computation facilities required to build and run and train large language models are currently um, really too high for the vast majority of people. But like all technology, eventually the size and the costs
Yeah.
become reduced over time, right? It's like solar panels or electric cars, and now you can get them for much cheaper than you could 5 years ago. It's the same with LLMs, and hopefully by the time we get the ability to download large language models and run them on your regular desktop computer locally and train them using your own data locally, hopefully by the end of 2025, if we're at that level, I think that would be a good time to get back in touch and see if
Absolutely.
that's something that we managed to crack by then or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's going to be a great topic, and maybe, I don't know, a great idea to see like December 10th, but 2025, to see where we're at right now.
Like
Completely
a regular December catch up with Peter.
Yeah, I'd be happy with that. I think that's a really good goal for next year.
Absolutely.
I
Okay.
agree.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Peter. Again, thank you for your time. And with this, we conclude today's episode of ELT in Chile podcast. So with Dr. Peter Crosthwaite from University of Queensland. And as we, said, Peter he's going to share some links that we're going to be sharing with everybody, especially like the open source books. I think that those are really interesting resources. And if you have any questions, yes, or comments, you can reach us at podcast@eltinchile.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, you can visit our website, www.eltinchile.com. So thank you again, Peter and Kevin.